I am Rich Diviney, and this is Win the Day with James Whittaker.
You're listening to Win the Day with James Whittaker.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.
Broadcasting from Los Angeles, California. Here's your host, James Whittaker.
Let's go.
Hey winners, welcome back to Win the Day. If this is your first time here, we sit down with some of the world's true change makers to give you all the tips, tools, and strategies to win the day every day. The quote for this episode comes from Buddha and says, "Every morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most." And what you've done today is decide to listen to this podcast, and that's a huge win already because we have a legend in the studio with us today, Rich Diviney. Rich is a best-selling author, leadership and human performance expert, and retired Navy SEAL commander. In a career spanning more than 20 years, he completed more than a dozen overseas deployments and was even involved with selecting the best operators for an all-star team of the most elite performers. Since retiring from the Navy, Rich has worked as a speaker, facilitator, and consultant with Sinek and the Chapman & Co. Leadership Institute. He's also taught leadership and optimal performance to more than 5,000 business, athletic, and military leaders from organizations like American Airlines, the San Francisco 49ers NFL team, Zoom, and Deloitte. Rich is the founder and CEO of The Attributes, Inc., and in 2021 released his first book, The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. The man knows what it takes to win. In this episode, we're going to talk about the keys to optimal performance in all areas of your life, how he made it through one of the most grueling selection processes in the world, the most important lessons from his 20-year Navy SEAL career, and how you can harness the right attributes for massive success. Before we begin, remember that the right bit of inspiration can completely change the trajectory of someone's life. So if there's a friend or loved one out there who needs to hear this episode or could use some help to win the day, share it with them right now. And if you want to help bring more winners into the community, give the show a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Without further ado, strap yourself in. Let's win the day with Navy SEAL Rich Diviney. Rich, great to see you, my man. Thanks so much for coming on the Win the Day show.
Thank you, James. It's great to be here finally.
Yeah, I know. We've been trying to tee this up for a while, haven't we?
4 or 5 months, I think. But, the consequence of living on different coasts.
Exactly, exactly. Well, first of all, thank you for your service. I know you've had a crazy career spanning many years all around the world. So really appreciate everything that you've done and for being here with us today. To set the tone for what we'll cover, I was wondering if there was a particular realization. Was there one thing that stood out above all else from your entire experiences in the Navy SEALs and learning about optimal performance?
Yeah, well, I would say it was certainly a maturation, but if there was one thing or the impetus of it all, I would say was going to SEAL training itself, right? You go to something like that, and again, SEAL training here in California and San Diego called BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL Training. 85% of the guys who start don't make it through, and I remember going through that, and upon graduation, I think if I remember correctly, our class started with about 170 people. We graduated about 38. And I remember graduation day around that, I looked around at these 37 other dudes, and I said to myself, how the heck am I here? Like, how did this happen? Because they seemed just so stellar, and I just seemed okay. And I think this, and what's interesting is that if you ask most of those guys, they were feeling the same thing. But that really started me down the road of really thinking about, okay, what drives performance on all levels, but especially at these most raw levels? Like, who are we at our most raw? And what are those things about human beings in particular that drive performance in different domains? Because it matters, and obviously only 15% of us made it through. Other guys did not, but those other guys who didn't make it through, they're excelling in other facets of life. They just didn't happen to excel on the beaches of Coronado. So that was really the impetus. And of course, I think as I went through my career and continued to do pretty interesting things and continued to be part of more and more specialized activities, that kind of imposter syndrome stayed with me, a healthy imposter syndrome. The kind of that question is like, man, these people around me are so much better than me. Why am I here? How am I here? upped my game, of course, but it really allowed me to start thinking about and diving deep into this stuff. And I think so that would probably be the best way to define that maturation.
There's that idea of like never judging a book by its cover, and I guess you couldn't help it yourself if you help yourself if you're looking around the other guys at Buds, some really big, very athletic people. You might be instinctively thinking that these guys are going to absolutely crush it.
Yeah.
But as I've heard from other SEALs and things before, they're often some of the first to tap when it gets tough.
Yeah, most don't, and it's funny. Almost everyone who's made it will say that none of us would put money on any candidate starting SEAL training, even those of us who've been in the community for a while. The odds are not they're against you, and there are people who you could look at and you'd say, well, I would assume that person would make it, but none of us would put money on, especially 100%. It's just you can't tell. It's all very internal, but it's really all about who we are at our most raw, and what are those attributes and qualities that need to be predominant to perform and succeed in that discipline, in that domain, because that domain is very specific, and there are other domains. I always kind of say we're all rock stars in certain domains. We're all doofuses in other domains of life, right? It just depends on picking the right one. So you can be a rock star.
Yeah. In your book, you mentioned how that it was always your dream from a young age to be a U.S. Navy fighter pilot. Yeah. I grew up watching Top Gun, 300 times. Yeah. I wanted to be a U.S. Navy fighter pilot. How did you find yourself moving away from wanting to be the fighter pilot and all of a sudden signing up to be a Navy SEAL?
Yeah. Well, the fighter pilot stuff. In fact, it wasn't Top Gun. It was my favorite two books growing up. As I entered into probably the early teens were Chuck Yeager's autobiography, Yeager, and then a book called The Right Stuff by Thomas Wolfe about the earliest space program stages. Those are my two favorite. I read them cover to cover many times, and I read those and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to be a pilot. I want to be a fighter pilot. And so that was the impetus. And so that my twin brother and I were bent on that all the way through high school and even into college. But it was really the end of high school, the first Gulf War kicked off, and obviously it was a very short, I think 100 days or something. But post that, there was an article I found in Newsweek magazine that outlined all the different special operations communities. I think the article is titled "Secret Warriors" or something. And I remember looking through this, and that was my first introduction to the Navy SEALs. They had all the units, so they had the Marine Recon, Rangers, SEALs, Green Berets, and things like that, and they had pictures of all these guys in different environments: underwater, snow, jungle. I would guess maybe 25 pictures arrayed around 5 pages. What I noticed, though, was distinct to me was that out of that 25 pictures, like 20 of them were SEALs, but these SEAls were just all in different environments. And so the sea, air, land thing, and the fact that they're in the Navy, and I was like, and the other fact that they made water, like they came from the ocean. The ocean was their starting point, and I loved the water. I loved the ocean. And I really said, wow, these guys are pretty cool. And I started reading a couple books about it, went to college, still kind of, and joined the Navy ROTC, still with like pilot in mind. But I said, maybe this other thing. And ultimately said to myself, when it came time to select, I said, I know I can be a pilot, but I don't want to wonder if I could be a SEAL. And so that's what made me choose, and fortunately it worked out.
And you were a New England boy, so you used to cold water and sharks.
That's right. I don't know about sharks, but I know that I was comfortable in the water. And to this day, I scuba dive. I scuba with my family. I am the most comfortable underwater. I could literally, I have fallen asleep underwater, but I just love that environment.
Yeah. What does it mean to be a Navy SEAL, and what do SEALs do better than any other force?
Well, to be a Navy SEAL, I think the idea of being a Navy SEAL as opposed to other Spec Ops units, the uniqueness is the water element, and always has been. The fact that the predecessors of the SEALs were the Naval Combat Demolition Teams and the UDTs, Underwater Demolition Teams, and they all came from the water. They were kind of born of the water, and they all made the water their home base, right? Which is really intriguing to me, because the ocean is a hostile environment, right? The temperatures, the bone crushing pressures, and the ocean will kill you if you turn your back on it. And the fact that they made this environment their home was so audacious. And one of the things you heard about SEALs, and I even heard when I was in the teams, is that if the enemy's in pursuit of you, always go to the water, because no one is brave enough or stupid enough to follow you there. And that just for me was really cool. It's like if I'm making this hostile place my home because people won't follow me there, that was cool. And the fact that I was just comfortable in the water, I think that's kind of what it means to be a SEAL. And again, some of the other Spec Ops units, certainly they operate in the water, they do some diving and stuff, but that was the only unit that really is born of the water. And the frogman was really what I loved.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's people who come from like landlocked areas who don't seem to have a great deal of water exposure, yet that adaptability attribute is probably the one that you mentioned in your book, where all of a sudden they can not only get that exposure to it, but they can actually then thrive and then become a SEAL.
And rest assured, there are some Navy SEALs who don't like the water, right? I mean, and so this is the other part of your question: what Navy SEALs in fact are, which is what I defined them even when I was a SEAL. It wasn't about the shooting or the diving or the skydiving. We are masters of uncertainty. We are individuals and teams that can drop into deeply complex environments and start performing. And so really the superpower, and I begin to put a lot of military units in this category, not just SEALs, but the superpower is that you can look at something that scares you, look at something that's deeply uncomfortable or challenging, and step into it proactively, and then begin to move through it proactively. And so I think that's the uniqueness that I really found. And I think if there's anything that Navy SEAls are or Spec Ops are, they are that. It's not really about, this mission or this big mission or whatever, or they're known for this. It's you put any one of these guys into a complex, unique, ambiguous, uncertain environment, and they will start to figure it out because that's just how we're designed. And I think we enter into training with some of the basic elements of how to do that unconsciously, of course. And that just gets hyper developed as you go through training. And of course, combat just super develops that.
What's the easiest thing to train a aspiring SEAL, and what's the hardest thing to train them?
Well, so now we're getting into training versus, again,
I guess skill development over say attributes.
So training is really for skill development. I mean, that's how I would define it. You train for skills. The Joint War College had a great quote. You train for certainty, you educate for uncertainty. And so training for certainty means you're training for skills. I think the education for uncertainty, that's when you're diving into attributes. And so I think the most difficult attributes, and I wouldn't even say the most difficult, because I guess the guys who make it through are the guys who have a preponderance of the required attributes already. You can't develop those things during SEAL training. You have to have them, at least a level of them, when you show up day one. Otherwise, you're not going to make it through day one. So given those attributes, you are then able to train in whatever discipline the SEAL teams require. Here's a funny story, which I tell a lot, and it actually occurred before I got to the teams. I went to Navy SEAL training in 96, so it seems like forever ago. But and back then, one of the first things you had to do when you showed up to SEAL training was you had to swim 50 meters in a pool. So jump in, swim 25 meters to one end, 25 meters back. The story goes that this kid shows up, and this happened apparently before I got there. The story goes, this kid shows up, it's his turn to swim. He jumped into the pool, sinks right to the bottom, and starts walking across the bottom of the pool to one end. Walks across the bottom of the pool back to the other end, comes up, he's gasping for air, nearly drowning. The instructor looks at him and says, "What the hell are you doing?" And the kid, who's trying to still catch his breath, looks at the instructor and says, "I'm sorry, instructor, I don't know how to swim." And the instructor pauses for a second and looks at the kid and says, "That's okay, we can teach you how to swim." Right? And the whole point of that is that the instructor knew that if this kid had the qualities, the attributes, whatever you want to call it, to show up to Navy SEAL training, one of the most elite maritime units on the planet, and he didn't know how to swim, he had everything inside of him that we needed for him to be a Navy SEAL. Teaching him the skill of swimming was going to be the easy part. That's just easy. So I think given the appropriate attribute combination, you are then set up to learn all the requisite skills that you need to learn in that environment.
Yeah, I'm picturing Goggins when you when you tell that story, someone like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who do things these days like 75 hard, just something to give them a challenge for like months at a time.
Yep.
When you go through SEAL training, obviously it's bringing out a lot of those dormant attributes, the things about yourself that you don't know are actually very valuable assets, and how resilient and adaptable you might be. Do you think people should figure out their own version of something like that so they can start to unearth some of those attributes rather than just trying to focus so much on staying in their comfort zone?
I totally think that. And I think I love the 75 hard. I know Andy Frizella, who runs that, and I love that program because it really allows someone to get uncomfortable in a series of disciplines. And I think that's absolutely essential for people to begin to grow. You have to step out of your comfort zone. Listen, growth is uncomfortable. You can't grow without being uncomfortable. It's a prerequisite. And so anything that allows you discomfort is going to help you grow, regardless of what it is. And so I would always encourage someone to look at those things that make you uncomfortable and practice that. In fact, it's funny you should say that. I was just talking to a young man who's in college right now. He's an ROTC, a Navy ROTC, and he wants to be a SEAL. He's an aspiring SEAL. And he asked me, hey, what can I do to prepare? And it's an interesting question because, you know, in SEAL training and BUDS, you're going to get really cold. You're going to have to run with logs and everything. Cold is usually the worst. Cold is what gets most people. And so a lot of aspiring BUDS candidates, and maybe even folks who think they, you know, who are past their prime and they wish they could have been SEALs, they wonder if they could do it, will expose themselves to cold over and over again to see, well, maybe I can get used to the cold. You'll never get used to the cold. And one of my buddies says it's like practicing getting kicked in the balls. So you're gonna get kicked in the balls anyway. You might as well not practice it, right? So but what I did tell him was, hey, practice doing things that are uncomfortable, and that it could be anything. It could be that girl you've wanted to talk to and you've been nervous. Go up and talk to her, right? That's you're stepping into uncomfort, to discomfort. You're stepping into to challenge, and I think those are anytime you can pick something to do, you're going to exercise that muscle. But then there's one more factor, and the other factor is uncertainty, because there are certain disciplines of discomfort that aren't uncertain, and I would place a lot of physical disciplines in this category. I mean, you know, going to the gym, it's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be challenging, but there's something certain about that, right? The more environments of uncertainty you can find yourself in and navigating through, that's some real training as well, because navigating through uncertainty is a whole nother level of being able to step into challenge, stress, and fear, because that's when the fear comes in, the stress comes in. So not very scary going to the gym, depending. I certainly say if you're just starting, it could be, right? But if there's fear involved, you've added a whole nother level to that challenge. And I think that's very, very healthy.
Yeah, developing the habit of getting out of your comfort zone and thriving on uncertainty.
Yeah, and stepping into fear.
Yeah. So all the aspiring SEALs, they do that training knowing that they have the excitement of the SEAL career afterward. How would you feel going and doing SEAL training again now? Do you think it's something that you could do just as easy as you did not that it was easy. Do you think that was something you could pass now, or you feel like now that sort of prize and that award over the horizon is gone?
Yeah.
Do you think that would be very much more difficult for you to do now?
Well, so I always say mentally I could go through it no problem. I think most SEALs could. Physically, I would die after day one. I mean, it was just my body. You got to remember, SEAL candidates are mostly between 18 and 22 years old. I was 22 when I went through. Your body is literally it's like Wolverine. You're healing so fast. Your testosterone. So yes, I would be curious to go through Hell Week or SEAL training again, but you know, my body would not make it. Yeah. So
we'll do a follow-up episode. Rich doing.
Yeah, it ain't gonna happen. It ain't gonna happen. So, but yeah, I think most of us would say, sure, I could do it again, and I might be curious to do it again because there's some nostalgia there. Might it be easier? Sure, because now you know the game, and you know you could probably go through it now. I could probably go through it now, and even as they're torturing us, be like, oh, I totally know what's going on. I totally know what this is doing, and blah, blah. So there's a knowing is or naming is taming type thing going on there. But yeah, the physical aspect does matter.
Yeah. Do you do you think that the Navy SEAL training in terms of being able to get the best candidates and get them as prepared as possible, do you think it's as close to perfect as it could possibly be? Or are there sort of one or two changes that you've thought about that you would implement if you were in charge of that?
Yeah, it's funny you should say. I was just, I know we're here in LA. I was in San Diego yesterday. I went to the BUDS compound, and one of my close friends is actually working there. And so he and I were talking. He was showing me around and showing me all the changes. And what I will say is that no process is perfect. And I think the perfection, if there is a perfection in the process, is the fact that they are constantly looking at the process. And they're constantly asking themselves good questions about the process. The Navy SEAL training today is slightly different than it was when I went through. And that's a good thing. And it's not easier and it's not harder, right? Well, it might be even harder, I would say, but, because I'm not one of those dinosaurs who says, the hardest one was when I went through. It is quite possibly harder today than it ever was. But I know that they are now looking at it in a much more diligent way. They're constantly asking themselves the right questions. How do we get the right candidates? Who are the right candidates? What are we doing that could be detrimental to getting the right candidates? And I think that consistent introspection and looking in the mirror and asking those questions is what I've found the process has done for years and years and years. And right now, the people that I see who are in charge of the process, I have 100% confidence that that's going on. So,
what about when you become a SEAL and you're out on a mission and bullets start flying and all that? How do you train for people to be calm when that situation, when they're really encountering that for the first time?
Well, so again, you don't train. You assess and select those people with the attributes to be able to calm themselves, to be able to understand and manage their autonomic system in a way that allows them to be calm through that. Now, what you do train is you train in the skills that you'll need in that environment. But those skills could be very basic, like shooting and moving and communicating, right? And what happens, and what units like that often do, is you train those skills to the level of mastery. In other words, you train to the level of you don't have to think about doing them. And it's not because necessarily, well, they're Navy SEALs, they have to be masters. It's because once you get to that level where you don't necessarily have to think about it anymore, you've just freed up your mind from a lot of space, or given it a lot of space to now navigate the uncertainty of the environment, right? And that's really what it is. When the bullets start flying, the number one thing you're going to be doing is figuring out what the hell is going on right now, and what's the next move. Where are people? You're figuring out the environment. The shooting back, the moving, and all that stuff, that's secondary. And so you train so that those skills are secondary, so that you're freeing up your conscious mind to actually deal with the uncertain environment.
Are there core components of achieving mastery, or is it a very different approach depending on what skill that you're actually trying to learn?
Boy, that's a great question. I would say that it's I would say the components would probably be dependent on what you're trying to master. But I think at a base level, to master anything, you have to take it down to the fundamentals. And so whatever the discipline you're trying to master is, you have to figure out what the fundamentals are first, and get really good at those, and kind of use this old the old adage in the SEAL teams: slow is smooth, smooth is fast. You start very slow and start very deliberately, and you take the time and you put in the hours to slowly develop this muscle, so that you get smooth, and smooth ends up being fast. And it's really interesting when you're in the business of gunfighting, right? You recognize that the key to success in a gunfight is being slow and smooth and very deliberate, right? And you sometimes I watch these old westerns and I wonder what it would have been like to kind of do one of these duels. But you know that the people who won those things when they used to do it were the people who were just very slow and deliberate. Because if you go too fast, you're going to miss, you know. And so I think it's the process of just doing that helps manage your thinking in a way that actually is very conducive to success.
You shared some really interesting stories in your book. It's one of the things I love. Actually, the opening of your book is one of the most gripping that I've ever had, you know, especially when you become a parent. There are things like what happens if your kid goes missing in like a train station, or all these other things. It's you think that you might be confident and calm and proactive in a situation like that, but when it can happen, I mean, it can be crazy. I was on a plane once flying from LA to Brisbane in Australia, and I was sort of like half asleep, and I heard a passenger on the other side of the cabin, sort of my same row, but on the other side of the plane. I was on the window on the other side, and someone yelled out, I heard screaming, and someone yelled out, "Oh my God, he's going to die." And I've sort of woken up to that. And I thought that, you know, I've done a lot of work to overcome anxiety and different things like that. I thought that something like that, I would actually be quite calm and composed. I was absolutely terrified.
Yeah.
It's basically pitch black because I had all the lights out, and you just have no idea what's going on. It turns out, you find out a few minutes later, someone was actually having an epileptic fit, and they were trying to get someone as quick as possible. But your brain starts racing to like, we're in a plane here over the ocean, goes down. There's absolutely nothing we can do, and we're all going to die. It's very hard to stop your brain from racing, and that's the stuff that when you wrote that book, as a reader, you can feel it come across. And I think that's really important with the stuff you do. You need to transport someone to that moment so they can start to understand some of those attributes and how they might respond in that situation.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring up those examples. I tried to write those examples so that when I wrote them and read them, I would be nervous. So the examples in there are meant to be nerve-wracking, even for someone like me, because it's like, okay, what the hell would I do? But yeah, I think it's when we're in these situations of deep uncertainty and the fear response starts to ride, the autonomic response starts to go, because literally what's happening neurologically is our frontal lobe is starting to take a back seat, and we're starting to get to an autonomic overload, which means our limbic brain takes over. now we're acting without thinking, which in most cases, that's not good, right? In some cases it is. I mean, when we touch a hot stove, we want our body to take over and remove our hand without having to think about it. But in most cases, especially today, in today's environment, you want to be able to think through these situations. And so it's really about understanding that when we get into these, how is my autonomic response happening? And can I begin to manage it in a way that brings my frontal lobe back online, allows me to start making decisions about my environment. And that's really some of the secrets to mastering uncertainty and moving through that type of stuff.
We had William Branham on the show, 26-year Navy SEAL, and he spoke about he's much more comfortable in a gunfight than he is speaking on stage. Yeah. Did you have a similar thing when you sort of moved away and started doing consulting to the corporate world?
First of all, I love Will, by the way. Yeah. Great dude. I tried to keep it in context, and I would say certainly. Well, here's a funny. When I got out, I started working with my buddy Simon. I was with the Barry Wehmiller Institute, Leadership Institute. So I was quite literally put in front of people, either speaking or teaching. I was not comfortable doing it, but I knew in choosing to do that I was actually stepping into something that I was uncomfortable. It was a very deliberate decision for me. Was I said, I'm interested in writing, so I should probably get used to being in front of people. And so I began to do it and kind of step into it every time. And I started to, inoculate myself, understand, okay, how does this feel? What does it mean? Can I get better at this? It was as I was getting more comfortable. I was not at the beginning stage, probably in the mid stage, and I was getting ready to give a talk. And it was a big crowd. I think it was a couple thousand people, pretty big for, the biggest I had spoken to. And the organizer, prior to me going on, asked me, pulled me, when we were talking, he said, "Hey, are you nervous at all?" And I said to him, well, can I ask you a question? He said, "Sure." I said, "Is anybody going to be shooting at me when I'm on the stage?" And he looked at me, he's like, "No, of course." I was like, "Well, I got nothing to be nervous about, right?" And it was really meant to be a joke, but what I recognized is I was really just reframing, and what I was saying to myself was like, listen, I'm not going to die up there, right? No one's shooting at me. I can look at this, I can frame it in a way. But what we have to recognize, and I want to make sure people understand this because I get this a lot. Well, you're a Navy SEAL. I mean, how can I, you're just, your levels of courage and, fear inoculation are just, how can I even relate? Fear is subjective, okay? And the physiological results of fear in our system are identical to every human being, which means Will and I can be in a gunfight, okay? And we can literally be feeling less fear than the kid you just asked to stand in front of his or her class and give a presentation, right? That kid could be experiencing 10 times more fear physiologically than Will and I in a gunfight, right? So we have to understand that fear is going to be subjective, but when it starts to show up in our system, physiologically, there are reactions in our system. And it's really about understanding what those reactions are and starting to map ways to deal with those to start stepping into it more effectively.
What about the fear of a situation? I forget what it was, but there was a story of the Delta operator who was in a terrorist attack in a hotel, something like that, but he was there by himself. Like, what if you're in a situation where it is a gunfight, where you don't have the team around you, everything's just gone pear-shaped?
Yeah.
How do you manage that fear response? I imagine that for maybe everyone, maybe I'm wrong on this, that you would still have a significant fear reaction to it.
Well, you do. And again, if you're talking about a Delta guy or a SEAL or someone who's been in these environments, fear is not, you're actually leveraging your fear more than reacting to your fear. And again, the fear response is going to be muted automatically, because what happens in our brains is that when that type of stuff happens, the first thing our brains will go to is, okay, what do I need to do? What is the action in this moment? We think about that immediately. And by doing that, we're actually muting this autonomic response. But again, what we're doing is we're engaging our conscious mind, which is preventing it from going back into the going to the back seat. So we engage our conscious mind by starting to ask questions about our environment. What can I do? We start to act. A lot of us also have a little bit what I call a higher temperature level. Right? I talk in the book about courage and kind of the courage switch and where our autonomic arousal begins. And I usually use boiling point as the example. I mean, we say boiling point, that degree level could be normal, right? But some people start moving into autonomic overload before boiling point, at maybe 95 degrees. Other people, it takes 220 degrees before they reach boiling point. And I think a lot of us, we tend to have a little bit higher of a temperature of a restart setting, because typically when the environment begins to go chaotic and descend around us, we're the type of people who begin to slow down. And this is funny because my wife would joke, I live in Virginia Beach, and And we've, where we live, I have a Navy SEAL who lives across the street. I have a Navy SEAL who lives down the street to the right, and one down the street to the left. And I remember my wife saying, "Man, I'm so glad these guys are in the neighborhood." And I said, "Why?" I said, "Because if anything bad happened, I could always go to them, and they act like you act." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, as soon as something bad happens or chaos ensues, they immediately calm down. You guys immediately calm down. You start working the problem." And so I think this Delta operator, I mean, I would imagine there was fear, but again, we have to understand fear generates some biochemistry that's very useful. I mean, there's a lot of adrenaline, there's focus, right? And so it allows us, I mean, it's designed to allow us to survive. And so a lot of people are afraid of fear, right? But fear used effectively and metabolized, you are at the heightened physical level right there. I mean, this is why you see people in really stressful situations do superhuman things. Our body's being flooded with some very powerful biochemistry that's going to allow us to do some very powerful things. If we're thinking at the same time, you're talking about someone who can do some real heroic stuff.
Something that you and I both do in our work is talk about that the quality of your life is directly proportionate to the questions that you ask. What you just mentioned there is it coming up with the right questions to solve the problem and figure out what can I do? Yet there are people out there, things like finding the gift in adversity or how have I grown from what has happened to me for resilience, which I know is one of your attributes. And yet there are people out there who never even ask themselves any questions. And in fact, what they're doing is giving themselves, when they react to that fear response, they're giving themselves answers for a question they never even asked. Like, I'm going to die in this situation or whatever it might be from anxiety. The ability to ask the right questions in any given situation is directly proportionate to how successful you can be in life and business, and it sounds like on the battlefield too.
100%. And I think one of the reasons is because it puts you in control. By asking a question, it puts you in the driver's seat. You are no longer reacting, you are proacting, right? And so regardless of it has to be the right question, right? Why does this always happen to me is a reacting question, right? But a question like, hey, what can I control right now? What do I understand right now? And again, I know you talk about it too. Our brains are question answering machines. They're designed to do that. We do it unconsciously all the time. Our brains are looking at something. We might say, okay, bouncing off our hippocampus and our occipital lobe, and it's saying, hey, have I seen this before? In what context have I seen this before? Our brains are constantly asking questions. When we deliberately place a question into our conscious mind, our brain has no choice but to give us answers. That's just what happens. It just answers the questions. Sometimes the answers are ridiculous, right? But they still come up with answers. And so anytime, I think asking questions and taking control of the ability to ask questions in any environment, that is the trick. And I think those people who do it constantly now get to a point where you do it unconsciously. And so you don't even think about the question you're asking. You just start acting. But rest assured, you're acting because you've unconsciously asked a question. What can I control? What can I control? What can I control? Focus in, do it. Next thing, what can I control? Focus in, do it. And I think that's probably the key.
Do you consciously make the decision to win each day, like at this point in your life, or is it such a habit now that you're going to go and just get after it no matter what happens?
I don't consciously. And again, by the way, I love win the day. I love that whole philosophy. For me, winning it implies someone else losing sometimes, or something losing. There's a win and a loss. But when we talk about winning the day in the way you talk about, part of me understands that loss is good, and sometimes the day won't feel like winning. And I know we're gonna turn it into winning, right? But the idea is sometimes you got to take a loss. Sometimes you got to take a kick in the teeth, and sometimes the day is not going to feel like you won it. Sometimes the day is going to feel just pretty lousy. Now you can reframe that and i.e. win the day, right? But I think there's a power and a utility in accepting and autopsying loss, because that's where we grow, right? We grow from those lessons, and it's again, it's neurologically true. One of the things that neuroscientists will tell us is that when we create neural networks in our brain, when we learn something, those neural networks and the myelination that happens is accelerated by 10 or 20 times when three things are present. Those three things are novelty, intensity, and focus. Okay, so when you have all those three things, you learn things very fast. This is why when we learn the alphabet, we'll never forget the alphabet song, because there's a tune to it, But it's also why it's the difference between being told a stove is hot or touching a hot stove. When you touch a hot stove, there's immediately novelty, intensity, focus, right? bad things that happen in our lives, the times we lose, are novel, they're intense, and we're deeply focused, right? This is why we learn more from hardship than we do from success. And so I think part of winning the day, which I know is your philosophy, is even those days that doesn't feel like wins, you can actually turn it into a win by understanding that this loss is actually good, and I'm going to use it. And so that's probably how I approach it. Yeah. I think for me, I think setting these horizons of success is really critical to the accomplishment of any goal. But those horizons have to be subjective to what feels right for you. Yeah. So in some cases, hey, I'm going to get to the end of the day. That's the horizon. Some cases, I'm going to get to the end of this hour, or this 10 minutes or this 10 seconds, right? Some cases, it's I'm going to get to the end of this week, right? And so I think whatever that horizon is for you, again, it has to be meaningful for it to actually give you the reward that it's designed to give you, is also effective.
Yeah, we've had Janine Shepherd on the show before. She's a 6-time best-selling author. She'd actually qualified for the Winter Olympics, but was hit by a truck while she was riding her bike beforehand. Amazing, absolutely phenomenal. Probably the best example of resilience and best story I've ever heard. It really is phenomenal what she's been able to accomplish. She's a walking paraplegic and everything. And she talks about this concept of loosening up your idea that your life is supposed to be perfect. Yeah. And I love that. And what it reminds me about from your work is how you talk about this idea of embracing our humanness. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to sort of embrace our humanness rather than always striving so hard for this impossible ceiling of perfection in everything we do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the way I describe us as human beings is like automobiles. And I use the movie Cars, right? And it's not because my kids made me watch it 1,000 times. It's actually a good movie.
You made them watch it 1,000 times.
That's right. Yeah, but I love the analogy of us as cars because we're all automobiles. We're all humans, but some of us are Ferraris and some of us are Jeeps and some of us are SUVs. And there's no judgment there because the Ferrari can do things that the Jeep can't do, and the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do. And so I think what it really comes down to is, can we lift our hood and figure out what we're running with? Because if I'm a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track, now I know where my friction points are, or I know enough to say, oh, shoot, I'm going to go get on a Jeep track, right? So I think this is where that analogy is. None of us are perfect. We all have our own unique set of things that make us who we are. And just like automobiles, I mean, the Jeep and the Ferrari are they have two distinctive tasks. Neither of which, because they're apples and oranges, could you define as perfect, right? And so, what is the perfect vehicle? That's also subjective. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a great analogy and a great concept to understand. To say, hey, we are not. And oh, by the way, perfection is the lowest standard in the world because it's literally impossible. You can't do it. And even our universe is not perfect, right? It's all imperfect. But it's the imperfections that have made us who we are, and those little nuances and things like that. So I think we should bask in our imperfection.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be back with the show shortly. I just want to let you in on a little secret. As you know, the win the day mentality is my life's work, and I've studied it for the last 15 years. During that time, I've helped thousands of people from all over the world to win in their career, in their relationships, and in their life. Well, for the last few months, I've been working behind the scenes on a special project with Success Magazine. For the first time ever, I'll be bringing you the exact blueprint that I've used to help the leaders of tomorrow to take their performance to the next level today. It's a self-study course with videos, activities, and a detailed workbook so I can personally walk you through everything. It's also highly practical, results-driven, and will transform your life like nothing else, guaranteed. So if you're ready to win and win big, add your name to the wait list. Just go to jameswitt.com/win. That's jameswitt.com/win. You'll also find a link to that in the show notes, and you'll be notified as soon as it's available. All right, let's get back to the show. Was there a Navy SEAL mission that you were on or that you were overseeing that epitomizes everything that it means to be a SEAL or the attributes that you include in your book?
Well, it'd be hard to name one, and I probably couldn't talk about anyone anyway. But I think in any mission, military mission, but we'll just use the SEAL mission. You're always planning those things and setting them, putting them together in phases. And typically the phases are you're going to insert, which means you're going to get in somehow. You're going to infill, which means transit to the target. You're going to have the actions on the objective, which is the actions on the target. And then you're going to exfiltrate, which is move away, and then exfil, which is move off, right? So just to kind of lay that out. You could say you're going to insert in a helicopter. You're going to get out of the helicopter. You're going to patrol into the target. That's your infiltration. So your insert, infiltration. Actions on the objective, you're hitting the target. Exfiltration, you're walking out to wherever the helicopter landing zone is, and then you're extracting with the helicopter, right? And I think that process of planning a mission epitomizes the way the Navy SEAL brain works, right? What we do is we chunk. If we have a massive problem to solve, we chunk it into meaningful pieces, right? And then we solve each piece to the extent that we can. Now, you can never solve each piece to perfection. In other words, I can't plan my insert phase or my infill phase in a way that's like, I kind of know exactly what's going to go on here, and I'm ready for everything. I can say, hey, during this phase, if this happens, or if this happens, or if this happens, maybe the top three things, then we'll do this, this, or this. After that, if something different happens, we'll just figure it out on the fly, right? Mm-hmm. So in other words, we get ourselves to about 80%, and then the next 20% was like, well, we'll just figure it out. We have that confidence, right? And I think that epitomizes the SEAL mentality is in any huge task, how can you break it into meaningful chunks, plan or address those meaningful chunks to the extent of your ability, but be uncomfortable not being perfect in it, right? And then just move in and just do it. And so, and then once you're done with that, right, you're now on the next thing. In fact, a quick example: I was with a couple SEAL buddies of mine a couple weeks ago during the holidays, actually, and some of the things we did together was we did what called hey-ho jumps, which is high altitude, high opening. You're jumping out at about 20,000, 22,000 feet. Usually nighttime, pitch black, you have night vision, all that stuff. You're getting out, you're pulling your chute, you're counting to 4 and pulling your chutes, and now you're going to be flying somewhere for a while, and then you're landing and then doing your thing. And we were all kind of thinking about this because we were actually reminiscing as to the adrenaline rush that something like that gave us. It's like it's almost hard to describe that rush you get, especially when you do it with people you really care about. But all of us were kind of remarking the fact that, and I think my buddy said, hey, when I was standing on the ramp, getting ready to jump, what do you think the one thing I was thinking of was? The one thing because we were standing on this ramp, we have this whole mission. We had, a whole mission in front of us to go do. What's the one thing I was thinking of? And both of us knew exactly what it was, and that was nail the exit. That's the one thing, which, in other words, get out of the plane in a stable position. That's it, right? That's the only thing you're focused on. Once you do that, what's the next thing? Well, now pull my chute. Okay. What's the next thing? Now that's done. Okay. What's the next thing? Okay. Now I'm going to make sure everything's good. Okay. What's the next thing? It's all, and so the mind, the SEAL mind, and I think the master of uncertainty mind takes these enormous things and says, okay, what's the thing I'm going to focus on? What's the most important thing in my life right now? And for us, standing on the edge of that ramp, it's nail the exit. Okay. Once that's done, cool. Okay. What's the next thing? Open my chute. Okay, cool. What's the next thing? And you just go through that step. So I think SEAL missions are inherently designed. I think most military missions are designed this way, but the way we plan them are inherently designed to just take it down into steps, and you go step by step by step by step. And you have some contingency planning in there thrown in because, some things you want to just make sure, okay, if this happens, we want to make sure we have some resources. But other than that, you're like, hey, I'm still throwing myself out of an airplane. Yeah. I'm still doing something that's highly uncertain. So if something that happens that's unplanned, then I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out in the moment.
And that final 20% is the example of decentralized leadership that the SEALs are so famous for, isn't it? Like the autonomy to sort of make your own call on the fly and do what you got to do.
Yeah, well, that allows it, right? The final 20% of uncertainty can exist and can be addressed because you've allowed for decentralized command. But I call it something different. I call it, in the book, I call it dynamic subordination. And what that is that the organization, the team understands that challenges and issues can come from any angle at any moment. And when one does, the person who is closest to that problem, the most capable, immediately steps up and takes lead, and everybody follows. And then the environment shifts, right? And then someone else steps up and takes lead. I was an officer in the Navy SEAL teams. I was pretty much in charge of every single combat mission I was on. It didn't mean I was always being supported. In fact, most of the time it was opposite. I was supporting other people. I was supporting my breachers, my snipers, my assaulters. Sometimes the environment would shift, and they would be in support of me for a moment, but then it'd shift again. And so I think that's really what decentralized command is this dynamic subordination environment where every team member understands you are a part of an organic living element, and you are literally on key to either step up or support, or step up or support. And there's zero arrogance. It's all humility in the sense, and again, not humility is like I'm bending my knee and all that. Humility says like I am you can be very confident and still humble. It's like, I know exactly why I'm here and what I'm supposed to do. And when something happens, I'll do it. If I don't know what's going on, I'm immediately going to step back and let someone who does know in, and I'm going to support that person. And then the environment shifts. We do that. So I think that's how that's how that manifests in life.
Yeah. Did the involvement in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, very little water compared to a lot of other countries, did that change the preparation and the mandate of what the Navy SEALs do?
It changed it to the extent that we wanted to make sure we understood the environment and the environmental conditions and the tactics that we needed to apply in that environment. But the baseline grit gumshoe attributes only just allowed us to dominate the way we did in the environment. And in terms of the water, yes, certainly the community. In fact, we saw ourselves get away from the water for many years. But the community has readjusted, and the communities, as those conflicts drew down, and as SEALs came back out, the community has gotten back into the water a little bit more because that's really our bread and butter.
Yeah, back to its roots.
Yeah.
You were tasked with putting together a group of the most elite out of those who are already SEALs. Can you share a little bit about that selection process and what you were looking for specifically, and maybe a broader scope of some of the missions that those types of people would be involved in?
Yeah, and I would say very specialized. I wouldn't even say most elite because even this very specialized command had a specific mission to accomplish, and it didn't mean that the folks doing that were any better than the folks doing the other missions, right? So, but the very specialized commands, what we were charged to do, and the assessment selection that I ran was we had to get candidates from the other SEAL teams, and the candidates had to come with recommendations and good reports, obviously, but they'd come to our own selection process, and then we put them through this 9-month selection, and we got about a 50% attrition rate, which is okay because any assessment selection program implies attrition. What was not okay is that we weren't effectively describing why guys were attriting. We were saying stupid stuff like, well, they couldn't shoot very well or they couldn't do this very well. And that was just not sitting well with them. It wasn't sitting well with us. Our leadership started saying, and even the outside leadership said, hey, what's going on there? And if we couldn't give them any more than, well, they couldn't cut it, then, so it wasn't a good place to be. And so when I took over, I was kind of tasked with, hey, Rich, can you start articulating this a little bit better? And so
is that to sustain morale for when they go back, so they don't
a little bit kind of everything.
Yeah.
So there's first of all, we want to sustain the morale for the person to go back and say, hey, listen, you're a good SEAL, right? There's nothing, you have a lot to give. You just didn't have a couple of the things that it took to do this specialized mission. It helped with relationships between the command and other SEAL commands, but also I think just it helped us understand our process. I think, it's unconscious genius is okay up until a point, all right? And until a point where you're actually getting questioned and you actually have to provide some cogent answers. And so I was asked to start thinking about those cogent answers. And that's where I got into the attributes work. And I really said, well, the problem, I think, in our inability to explain is we're looking at performance myopically. We're looking at it strictly based on skills, and performance is so much more than skills. And we know that because we've been through basic SEAL training. I mean, the kid of the pool is a perfect example. But another example, I'd been doing this work, when I embarked upon this work, I'd been a SEAL for 10, 11 years by then. So I'd been on a ton of hundreds of combat missions. And again, in BUDS, you spend hundreds of hours running around with boats on your head and hundreds of hours exercising with 300-pound telephone poles and freezing in the surf zone. And at the time, when I started looking at this, I said, well, I've been on hundreds of combat missions. I've been on thousands of training evolutions. Never on one of those did I carry a 300-pound telephone pole, right? Or a boat on my head, right? So what they were doing to us in BUDS was not training us in the skills to be Navy SEALs. They were teasing out these attributes. So what we were doing in this specialized training, now, a little bit different, because in the specialized training, we were, in fact, teaching skills, okay? But to articulate why certain guys weren't effectively able to do those things, it wasn't about they couldn't do the skill. There was something behind that. What were the attributes we were looking for? And I think that's really where there's the distinctiveness between that command, other commands, even SEALs, Green Berets, Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon. There's a lot of similar attributes, of course, but there's going to be distinctions and differences. And so I think the distinctions come in the attributes required to do those specialized missions and roles.
I noticed that resourcefulness was not one of the attributes that you have written down there. I thought it might be in cunning, and I had a look at cunning, and it was one of those ones where I love that, by the way, that the sense of humor one in there. I think that's so great. Yeah. I wasn't the class clown. I was definitely a podium finish, but I love all the different attributes that you've got included. But resourcefulness specifically, are there components of resourcefulness that make up the other attributes, or where does resourcefulness?
Yeah, I love that. And I would argue that, and I haven't thought about this, so I could be wrong here, but I would argue that resourcefulness is a result of certain attributes. I think resourcefulness is a result of open-mindedness and cunning and perhaps even adaptability, right? So I think a lot of times we get traits that we describe people with, and we think of them as specific attributes. Grit is a perfect example. A lot of people talk about grit as a singular thing, and it's not. In the book, it's a category, and grit is a result of attributes kind of blended and catalyzed and stewed together to make up grit. And I think resourcefulness would fall into that category.
How do you prepare good people to be great leaders? And is everyone capable of being a great leader?
I think it's a great question. Is everybody capable of being a great leader? No, I wouldn't say so. But here's why. And it's because leadership is not a position. Leadership is a behavior. There's a difference between being in charge and being a leader. One is a position, one is a behavior. And by the way, I always joke, whereas you can self-designate as I'm in charge or be put in charge, you can't self-designate as a leader. You can't call yourself a leader. That's like calling yourself good-looking or funny. Other people decide whether or not you're good-looking or funny. Other people decide whether or not you're a leader, because other people decide whether or not you are someone they want to follow. Okay, and if you call yourself a leader and you look back and there's no one following you, I got bad news for you, right? But these behaviors are what cause other people to say, that's someone I want to follow. And we saw this in the military. I saw this in the military, even in my career, even the SEAL teams. There'd be someone in a hierarchical position above me, and I'd be like, I wouldn't follow that person anywhere. Meanwhile, there's someone over here who has no hierarchical position whatsoever, or even lower on the hierarchical chain than I am. I was like, I would follow that person to hell and back. And it's because of the way they behaved. And these behaviors stem from these attributes. And these attributes in the book, I talk about these attributes: empathy, decisiveness, selflessness, authenticity, and accountability. Those are attributes that lead to behaviors that people typically say, I want to follow that person. And so not everybody has a preponderance of those attributes, which means not everybody is necessarily going to be looked at as a great leader. Now, whether or not someone, I guess anybody could at some point in their lives have someone else say, you know what, I think of this person as a mentor or as a leader. So I guess I'll modify my answer. Anybody can be a leader, but it's only because someone has said, I will follow you. I choose to follow you.
Yeah. And I guess leader isn't necessarily, a leader can be a bad thing if you're a leader leading someone to a negative outcome.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. But again, that's up to the person who's following. I mean, again, it's not who's to say. I mean, there are tons of people in history, some people in current present day who you look at and it's like, I don't know why people look at that person as a leader, but they're still looked at as a leader, right? And it's their choice. It's not my choice; it's their. So it's a very subjective designator. So people have asked me, are leaders born or are they made? And I say they're neither; they're chosen. And if you want to be chosen as a leader, you probably need to execute some of the or behave some of these attributes that we talk about.
Who do you want people to be once they finish reading your book?
I would love for people to be introspective about their performance. Here's, one of the things that I really got fascinated with as I kind of went through this process, and certainly after coming out of the Navy, was this idea of who are we, and really more specifically, who are we at our most raw? Because we always hear the old adage, like it's the true. It's in the worst times that the true us shows up, right? I'm always like, oh, who's the true us? And of course, I went through a career of the most raw all the time, right? So I was fortunate to be put myself in an environment where the most raw was just on display. And what I think is, if people can come away with this, these attributes start to speak to who we are at our most raw, which allows someone to say, okay, now I know why I behave the way I do. In fact, and more importantly, now I know why I behave the way I do when things are at their worst. Okay, and if someone can have that realization, I just think that's great. If they can read the book and start examining and building that introspection for themselves and understanding their own performance, gosh, it's a real cool thing for me.
Yeah, it's huge. A lot of your work has been about identifying the winners as quickly as possible, winners being the ones who are going to get the job done, or whatever the job is. If you're sitting down with the management team of an organization, which I know you've done a bunch, how quickly can you determine how successful someone will be, and what type of things are you looking for?
Yeah, the process we go through with organizations is we first help them figure out what their attribute list looks like, because the attribute
it's much easier for them to tell them, give themselves some of that feedback.
Well, it's actually not easy. Well, we have to give them. We give them the tools. We give them the process to do that, right? But what we explain to them, and what someone will learn reading the book, is that the list of attributes required to be a great Navy SEAL team is going to look different than the list of attributes required to be a great sales team, or a great teaching team, or a great surgical team, whatever that is. That list of attributes is unique. And so what we'll do is we'll go into organizations and say, okay, we have a process we'll take you through to allow you to figure out what that master list looks like. Okay, now you have a template from which you can say, okay, now we look at the positions in each position in the organization. We can say, okay, from this master list, what are the attributes that it takes to do this job, to do this job, to do this job? Now you have something from which you can evaluate performance. Not only evaluate performance, but more importantly, hire the right people. Because so many organizations spend so much money, waste so much money on the wrong hires. And it's often because they're hiring for the wrong things. They're seeing skills, they're seeing stats, they're seeing resumes. Oh man, this person's awesome. They have all the things they need to have. They've never seen that person's attributes. And so therefore, that person's going to come in as a rock star, quote, quote. And then when the environment, either they actually turn into the a-hole, right? Or the environment shifts and these people descend into chaos, right? Because they just don't have what it takes. They have all the stuff on paper, but they don't have what it takes. So we help organizations figure out what that attribute list looks like, apply it to positions in their organization, and then apply it to hiring processes and performance evaluation processes so they can determine that. Because I can tell you exactly what it's going to take to be a great Navy SEAL, but I'm not going to be able to tell someone, what to be a great accountant, right? I mean, so I think but what we do is we have a process that allows them to help them figure that out. Yeah.
Where does attributes link up with purpose, and how would you specifically help someone find what they're put on the planet to do?
Yeah. Well, I have to reference my good buddy Simon Sinek because he really helped solidify the importance of this why. And I think he says it so beautifully, and his organization has such a great process by which someone can help find their why. The why is going to be the North Star, I guess. And so I guess where I fit in, where I'm really passionate about is, okay, once you have that why, how do you get there? And what are those tools that you have available to yourself to get there, right? Because if the why is the destination, or at least the ideal to which you want to strive to, how can I adjust my performance and monitor my performance so that I can constantly be living that and getting there? And that's where I come in, right? So if you want your why, check out Simon, right? Once you figure that out, or if you want to figure out how to get there, that's when then we can help. The attributes begin to help.
Yeah. Speaking of people like Simon and Andrew Huberman, who I know you're really well connected with as well, you've taught them so much. What have they taught you specifically about optimal performance, or just other areas of life?
Oh my gosh, do we have another couple hours? Well, let me start with Simon. I was just with Simon this morning, so he's fresh on my mind. Simon has taught me so much about looking at ideas and simplifying them in a way that other people understand. He's brilliant at it, and it's really you can have great ideas all day long, and no one's going to listen to you if you can't articulate it in a way that people understand and relate to, by the way. And so he has always helped me simplify. In fact, even when I was writing the book, I call him and say, okay, here's what I got. Like, here's how I'm mapping this out. What do you think? And I remember a great example, the difference. I talk about the difference between skills and attributes. And I have like 3 things on the skill side, 3 things. When I first called Simon, I had 10 things on the skill side and 10 things on the attribute side. And I remember reading that to him. He's like, okay, there's too much. He's like, there's way too much. You got to simplify that. And so seriously, I mean, and that's why I got it down to 3 things. And that's all I needed. So he's taught me so much about that process. And it's so important because there's a lot of great stuff out there that a lot of people don't have access to because it's too complex, right? It's not articulated in a way that's complex or that's simplified. So that's really where he's helped. Besides being a great friend, a great mentor, he's helped me even when I got out of the Navy. Andrew is almost the opposite because Andrew and I, when we first started talking, he began to map complexity onto some of the ideas that I have. And by complexity, I mean neuroscience, biology, and physiology.
He's like, we're going back to 10. We're going from 3 to 10.
That's right. But I loved it. And I loved the idea. And when we first started to get together, which was like, I think 5 or 6 years ago now, we were talking about fear. And he was like, how do you guys, I mean, what do you do when you step, and so we talk about stepping through fear. And here's what I do. And it's like, okay, I think this is what's happening in the brain. And we spent hours, he came to Virginia Beach, and we spent a lot of time mapping this out. And so Andrew has been such an influence in helping map some. I love the complex stuff, and I deliberately left some complexity out of this book because if it were up to me, it'd be way. I mean, I just love going complex, but again, I'm listening to Simon. Hey, keep it simple. And so Andrew has really helped me that way, and shown hey, he's ignited and reignited my real interest and desire in taking some of these concepts of, hey, this is who we are, this is how we behave at our most raw, and say, okay, wait a second, this is why. It's because dopamine is getting released here, and serotonin here, and you have adrenaline here, and norepinephrine, which is the same thing, but acetylcholine, all that, it just maps it on, and because this and this, so much so that, I mean, it's mind-blowing, right? And any of us who listen to his podcast, sometimes you have to turn it off after 10 minutes. It's like, okay, let me just absorb what I just heard for a second, right? So one, in Simon's case, he's really helped me think simply about things and how to design that. And Andrew's helped me add explanation and complexity.
Yeah, what an amazing balance.
Yeah,
I love it.
I'm very, very grateful, very fortunate.
Yeah. In your book, something I really loved was the way that you described resilience. I thought that was absolutely fascinating, specifically how it differs from durability and how the most resilient people are the ones who can actually just get back to that baseline as quickly as possible.
Yeah, well, resilience, it often gets conflated with perseverance, but it's not. I mean, resilience you can think of as a rubber band. Am I stretching the rubber band? Is it resilient enough to go back to its original size, right? So resilience is the ability to get knocked off baseline, whether it be good or bad, and get back to baseline. Perseverance is the ability to kind of power through, and that, again, is an element of grit. But again, resilience is an element of grit as well. So I wanted to make that distinction because I think a lot of times some of these terms are either conflated or misinterpreted. And again, even with language, I like to go down to the very elemental. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lot of people essentially surrender their life when they allow something that happened to them a long time ago, like a divorce, to occupy their thoughts, and they stay very negative. If you were working with someone who wanted to be a leader to sort of lead their friend out of that situation of that negativity, what would you encourage them to do?
Recover. And the reason why is because trauma in any form, whether it be mental, physical, whatever, you have to effectively recover from that trauma before you can reflect in a way that allows you to grow from it. And by recover, it means you get to a point where you are, if it's mental, you are no longer emotionally triggered by it. If it's physical, obviously we know your muscles are healed enough so you can do it again. But recovery is really the key. And the trick is, though, recovery is going to be the length of time it takes to recover is varied vastly depending on the level of trauma, what it is. But recovery is the key. And I would also offer that anybody who needs to recover, i.e. needs to get a position, just let's talk mental or emotional trauma, needs to recover to the degree that the event doesn't trigger them so that they can actually reflect appropriately. They may not be able to do it themselves. They may need help, all right? And oftentimes do. And so that's why there are people out there who can help. So if you are someone like this, or you have a friend like this, encourage recovery, encourage help with recovery, because it's only when we can actually start looking at those events objectively that we can start interrogating them objectively. Because once you interrogate them objectively, you can start asking questions like, okay, how can I blame myself? Like, what blame can I put myself? How can I blame? Who else can I blame? What did I do right? What did they do right? What did I do wrong? And you can, and the answers you get to those questions in an objective state are going to be vastly different than the answers you get to those questions if you are still emotional, right? Yeah. But the ones that you get from an objective state are going to allow you to grow.
Yeah, remove the emotion. Yeah, ask the right questions.
But you enjoy life again. Sometimes you need help to do that, right? We can't all do that on our own. And again, if it's significant, get help.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question, Rich, before we move into the Win the Day rocket round. On your best day, what's an affirmation that you would write on a flashcard that you could show yourself on your worst day?
On my best day, I think it's the key it's that if I were to point to one key to success in all domains, it's the ability to delay gratification. If you can delay reward, delay gratification, that is a key to success. To say, hey, I am going to do the hard work now, and it's going to suck, so that I might enjoy a reward later.
Yeah.
That's what I always want to remind myself of, and I think that's often the downfall of a lot of people who can't succeed, is they cannot delay gratification so that they can push through.
Yeah, there's that Muhammad Ali quote. I used to have it up on my wall, actually. It said, "Don't quit, suffer now, and live the rest of your life as a champion."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, I guess Buds is like that. I mean, say, quitting is very singular, is very pinpoint, and when you do it, you ain't coming back, right?
Yeah.
So be very careful about that. Delay gratification.
Yeah, love it. Well, let's now move into the Win the Day Rocket Round. 10 questions with some quick answers. You up for this one, Rich?
Yes, of course.
Let's do it. Number one, what quote inspires you the most?
There are many, but one of the ones that that I love is, there's tons of Einstein quotes, but one of the Einstein quotes I love, and excuse me if I misquote it, but it's everybody's a genius, but if you try to teach a fish to climb a tree, he'll look like an idiot.
Yeah.
And that speaks to this idea that we are all automobiles, right? And we all have specific engines, and so you can't ask a Jeep to run a Ferrari race. It's just not going to happen, and that Jeep will look like an idiot. So I think that's one of my favorites, and it speaks to really the work I do.
Yeah, it's such a powerful metaphor. It really is. Yeah. Number two, morning coffee or evening wine?
Morning coffee. Yeah, I'm not a wine drinker. Yeah, so I'm a beer drinker. I'm trying to cut down, but I'm not a big wine drinker.
Yeah.
So.
Number three, what's one bit of advice you would give your 18-year-old self? Pain is coming.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of advice. Enjoy it. Enjoy every moment, because again, people have asked me, hey, what would you change? And honestly, I would never say anything to myself, because I'm a real believer. Well, I guess it's factual. I am here today because of every single thing that happened to me all the way back to the day I was born. Right. So every mistake, every success, everything I did right and wrong got me to where I am today. And I'm enormously grateful for today. So just enjoy it and let it happen, and do the same thing you did. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Number four, what book do you gift the most, or what book impacted your life the most?
Different answers to that one. I think the book that impacted my life the most was a book that I got when I was in high school called The Key to Yourself by Venice Bloodworth, and it talked about kind of a little bit metaphysical, which is fine, but it talked about this idea of law of attraction stuff, which I really enjoy. And I know there's it's a little metaphysical, and I'd love to see some science behind that. I don't know if there is, but when I read that book, I began to think differently about goals and outcomes and things like that, and it really changed my life. The books I read, and I try to read a ton of stuff, but I love Harari's stuff, Sapiens and Homo Deus, and I love the way he examines and extracts the human experience in a very hey, this is why this, and this is why this, and look at this, and we're just animals, and I just love that, and so I often recommend that book to people, or any of his books, to be honest with you.
Number five, was there a vulnerability you once hid within that became your superpower?
Probably this idea of imposter syndrome, insecurity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I was able to leverage insecurity to my advantage by turning it into, okay, I'm obviously doing something right here. Okay, so this insecurity, what does it actually mean? And if I feel insecure, can I actually use it to up my game? And that's exactly what I did. Every time I was around people, my whole career, I was like, these people are so good. Okay, I got to up my game. I think that's it.
Number six, what's one thing you've learned about failure?
It's necessary, and it's good. I don't like roller coasters, but I always ask people who love roller coasters, how many of you would like to go on a roller coaster that only went up? Okay, no one. Okay, roller coasters are fun because they go up and down and loop to loop and things like that. Okay, life is the same way, and life is going to be a series of ups and downs, and you can learn. It's the downs oftentimes that create the juice and the spice of life as well, if we let them. Obviously, there are some really bad downs, but if we can use those downs to grow, that's great.
Mm. Number seven, if you could sit on a park bench and have a conversation with someone alive or dead, who would it be?
Carl Sagan. Mm-hmm. Yeah, mm-hmm. I love space. I love the way he thinks. So, watch him on YouTube all the time.
Yeah.
Or Richard Feynman, who's a really interesting guy too. Yeah.
Number 8, what tool or resource best helps you run your life or your business?
Ask better questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Number 9, share one thing on your bucket list.
I want to get my pilot's license.
Nice.
It's been all these years. I wanted to be a pilot, and I still don't have my license. So that will happen.
You can achieve the Top Gun dream for me by just get it done, Rich.
At least in a Cessna. Yeah. So.
And final question: what's one thing you do to win the day?
I'm grateful every day. I hug my kids, kiss my kids, hug my wife, kiss my wife. I'm enormously grateful for where I am now. And if things stopped now, if someone says, "Hey, I'm sorry, you're not going to go any further in terms of any more success. You're just going to stay steady," I'd be fine with it. I really would. I'd find something else to do, I guess. But I'm constantly grateful, and I think gratitude puts you in such a great state. And by the way, Huberman's talked about it. There's powerful neurobiology that happens when we're truly grateful, and it can literally lift us out of some of the most depressive moods and states. So I try to be grateful.
Absolutely. Power of gratitude. Well, there are a bunch of ways to connect with Rich, and we'll link to all of these in the show notes. You can visit his website, theattribute.com. Connect with him on Instagram at Rich_Diviney and grab a copy of his epic book, The Attributes, on Amazon. Again, all of that and more will be linked in the show notes. Rich, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, James. It's a pleasure finally to get here. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me on another episode of the Win the Day podcast. We want to hear your thoughts on what we covered today, so drop a comment on the YouTube version of this episode with your favorite takeaway, any questions you have, or what actions you'll be taking as a result of what was shared in this episode. And if you found value in the Win the Day podcast, leave a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You'll find a link to both of those in the show notes. It'll only take you a few seconds, and more ratings really helps other people discover the show so they can get the mindset upgrade they need, and we can bring more winners into the Win the Day movement. That's all for this episode. Get out there and win the day. Until next time, onwards and upwards, always.